On today's show, Pierre-Luc Dubois is out for the foreseeable future, but Rasmus Sandin is back at practice.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi. I've covered the Capitals for the past 4 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, this is going to be a podcast about good news and bad news. In today's show, I'll talk about Rasmus Sandin back at practice. So encouraging signs for the Capitals blue line. A bit later, we'll talk about line combinations that we saw at practice and a quiet trade that the Capitals and Hershey Bears made. But just to get it going here, the big story, I'm starting with the bad news first, is that Pierre-Luc Dubois is out for the foreseeable future. This is the second time that he has been out due to injury. And what was said today is they don't know if he needs surgery, that this could be a big hit for a long period of time. And he's only played in 6 games this season, and in those 6 games hasn't put up any points. So has not been a contributor to this team at all to start this season. And now the word is that he's going to miss a substantial amount of time. Of course, we know he sustained an injury. It was against the Islanders. So a bad situation for the Capitals. And it's about scrambling now that do they try to patchwork the center position together with players on the team. I'm talking about Sordif. I'm talking McMichael, Lapierre. Do they try to call up a player from Hershey? Or do they do the thing that they should have done last summer, and that is acquire more talent? And it's something that was glaringly apparent. I did a small video on my break today at work, and I posted that and kind of just my thoughts about the Capitals and why they didn't do anything. And to kind of just touch on that again is that we knew this was going to happen, right? That we went into this season, the Capitals made no big splashes this summer, except for who did they acquire? Declan Chisholm and Justin Sordif, and that was it. We know that there was interest in Nikolai Ehlers and Jack Roslovic, and they didn't do it. They didn't want to give up any of the talent on the team, any prospects, any of that kind of thing, and pushing all their chips in on this youthful talent, which has materialized so far as Ryan Leonard and Hendrix, Lapierre, and it's been okay. That the Capitals did great things last year. Making it to the second round of the playoffs, winning a playoff round for the first time since 2018. But now things are looking rather bleak. And I know in yesterday's show, I said, don't panic. However, that was before I heard the news from practice today that Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to be out for the foreseeable future. Because as I take a peek at the Metro Division standings, Islanders, Capitals, and Flyers at the bottom of the Metro. Islanders, Caps, and Flyers all with 13 points. But the good thing is that it's early enough in the season because the teams ahead of them, Hurricanes, Blue Jackets, and Rangers, all with 14 points, that it's not out of hand yet, right? But you take a look at the Penguins and you take a look at the Devils, 18 points. Leading the Metro Division, that if they go on, a stretch of really great games, they could leave the Capitals in the dust. Now is the time to take care of the situation on this team. Something that Chris Patrick did not do last summer those chickens are coming home to roost, and this goes all the way back to last season at the trade deadline that Anthony Beauvillier was the only move. And, it's kind of drawing into question for me, around Chris Patrick, right? That, is he the guy? Is he the right guy? It seems like Brian McClellan was the right guy. And all this to say that the Pierre-Luc Dubois situation, big picture, has a ripple down effect that the Capitals weren't playing well. This doesn't make it any easier. And to be clear here, the power play, if that got working, would be much better. But Pierre-Luc Dubois out of the mix for the foreseeable future, not knowing if he needs surgery, it is a tough blow. He's only been here, he played here last season and, a brief snippet this year. And you could see what the Capitals wanted out of him, that two-way presence, the matchup center, the guy who can take some of the defensive shifts, some of the pressure off Strom and Dowd. And now gone for what sounds like an extended stretch. We know for a long period of time. If it's going to require surgery, of course, that much longer. Carberry said after practice, they're still figuring out whether he needs surgery. So that doesn't sound like just a week or two thing to me. And honestly, if we're being real here, this hurts more than the numbers show. He hasn't picked up a point in 6 games, but the impact isn't just on the score sheet. It's the matchups, it's structure, it's flow down the middle. And right now, the Capitals don't have another player who can fill that role. And who is on the team right now? We've seen it kind of plugged and played with Strom out, with Pierre-Luc Dubois out at different points. You'll probably see McMichael slide up a little bit. Maybe Lapierre gets another look down the middle. And Justin Sordiff, right? That, the Capitals, Spencer Carberry, very hot at Justin Sordiff at the center position. But, this is not the right time to try things out. That, they might fill in and do a good job, but they might not. And the swirl around the drain, that is the bottom of the metro, is getting louder and louder. We need to right this ship. And when I say we, I mean the Capitals, I mean Chris Patrick. They need to get the phone going, do whatever you got to do to try to, fill this up, fill the void. And, this was even Tarek El-Bashir talking about with Dylan Strom. How much time is he going to miss when he was out? And they're going to have to pick someone out. Now that is getting pushed to the front burner, because when I talk about options that are down in Hershey, I'm just taking a look at the active roster for centers. Henrik Rubinski. I also see here Ilya Protas. Those are 2 players to me that pop off the page as options at center. I know that Alexei has some history at center as well. He prefers not to play center, is what is being said. And Coach Carberry said that it's not fair on him to do that. So it is a tough position for the Capitals to be at. The power play struggling, Alex Ovechkin struggling, and now missing a key second line center. That it is not good for the Capitals right now. You got Kirk Muller trying to figure out the power play. Spencer Carberry, you guys need to form a brain trust and figure it out. That the Ovechkin, the Carlson thing isn't working. So big picture, this segment is about Pierre-Luc Dubois being out of the mix and just a part of the equation of the greater problem that is the 25-26 Capitals. And, all the insiders said it. Don't expect this from the Capitals. What you saw last year, again, it's really early. Tom Wilson is doing what he can do to lead this team. Logan Thompson in net. The defense, there are bright spots. Don't get me wrong. But, the power play, the big thing, like I'm talking about in this segment here, Pierre-Luc Dubois being out for the foreseeable future with a possible surgery. That is something that, they're going to have to do what they can fix. We can only do what we can do with Pierre-Luc Dubois. If it's surgery, it's surgery. If he's got to miss time, he's got to miss time. So work on the things that you can address. Chris Patrick, I'm talking to you right now. Get on the phone and bring in, we need another forward, right? And it's not going to be easy. The Capitals are going to have to give up something to get a good forward. It's not going to be easy, but that is at the point that we're at right now. We're not even at the Thanksgiving break, and we're kind of looking around here a little bit for the panic button, and I understand that. So that's the big thing. Pierre-Luc Dubois out for the foreseeable future. And how do the Capitals plan to address it? My answer, of course, is try what you can do, right? With McMichael, Lapierre, sort of, but also see what your options are externally and also evaluate your options in Hershey. If that means Protas, if that means Rabinski, something like that, that would be, what the Capitals have to do to try address the situation the best that they can. All right, so coming up here after the break, it's not all bad news. Rasmus Sandin taking on contact at practice, and Ethan Frank in a non-contact jersey. Some things that are wrong could be going right in a hurry. How's it all shaken out at practice? I'll discuss straight ahead. Let's be honest, most of us can't name all our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401k, saving, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. It's helped me organize my accounts, track my spending, and get a better handle on my investments without ever touching a spreadsheet. And the thing that I love about Monarch, and I know that you will as well, is it allows you to see where you're spending your money wisely, where you could use some work. If you have a significant other in your life, how you can plan your financial future together. There's so much to love about Monarch, and I know that you will as well. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So I started off with the bad news in the first segment, right? Talking about Pierre-Luc Dubois and the struggles of the Capitals. In the second segment, the good news is that we saw Rasmus Sandin shedding the non-contact jersey, looking like he's ramping up, ready to go. Also, Ethan Frank as well in a non-contact jersey, that there is at least some signs of hope in that regard. So let's dive into that in the second segment of today's show. Take a little bit of breath here, because not all the news, like I said, is bad. Rasmus Sandin was finally back in full practice, full contact, regular jersey, skating hard. And a sigh of relief, because he's been out the last 5 games or so with that upper body injury. And you could feel his absence, right, in a big way, that he was the player that the Capitals acquired to be, the long-term answer on the blue line from the Maple Leafs. And all things considered, we have seen him, in my opinion, get better and better and better. Because you take a look at it, the puck movement while he was out wasn't clean. The breakouts looked a little choppy. So hopefully that can help fix what's wrong in that regard. And, Sandin's one of those guys who makes subtle plays and doesn't show up on the highlights all the time. He's abandoned the dream of trying to emulate, Erik Karlsson, who a guy he looked up to, and just found his own game and kind of putting his own imprint on the team and, what kind of player he is. Sandin is that guy, like I said, that doesn't show up on the highlight reel. They make a difference over 60 minutes, a complete game. The first pass out of the zone, the extra half second of poise under pressure. And, in a nutshell, that is Sandin's game. And Spencer Carberry even said about it, he said, quote, he was in a regular jersey today. That is a good indicator he's real close. Unquote. Of course, the Caps got the Blues on Wednesday and the Penguins on Thursday. That we need as many, good hands, as many healthy hands on deck as possible. So definitely a big finally when it comes to Rasmus Sandin. And taking a look at the D pairs at practice, Faravari and Karlsson, Chikrin Roy, and Sandin skating with TVR, fixing up the chemistry and what was wrong with the Capitals on the blue line a little bit better. Now, The Capitals' big picture have played well with Declan Chisholm in there, but obviously Sandin, these kind of guys are an upgrade. That's solid. What we saw in practice today, that is a good 6-man rotation if everyone is healthy. And just to have him back in the mix means less chaos in the defensive zone. Plus, it lets guys play in their natural spots again. No more overloading the top four to cover the gaps, which I think, at least in part, would explain some of the games and how the Capitals have struggled. And when you talk about his time, he's averaging just under 20 minutes a night when healthy. So, what I would expect them to ease him in the first game or two, but then that's your puck mover right there in Rasmus Sandin. The big thing too is it also takes a lot of pressure off Carlson, who, just like every season has been logging heavy minutes. With Sandin back in the fold, ostensibly Wednesday, I guess we'll see. If not Wednesday, hopefully Thursday, they can balance out and maybe even see smoother play and smoother movement. And hey, how inconsistent the unit, the defense, the Capitals' big picture, any change that helps zone entries or puck rotation is worth it. So that's the good news. A bright spot in an otherwise rough injury week. And like I said, we did see the return of Ethan Frank, a depth piece at the end of the day there as well. But, when you try to take on a guy like Rantanen and think that you're going to move him or check him or whatever was going on in Ethan Frank's head, don't do that again. Just don't do that. That guy's not going to budge. You're much smaller, and just kind of stay in your own lane there. I appreciate where his head's at, but at the end of the day, it was a bit worrisome. So it's good to see some of these guys start to trickle back. And, hopefully, like I said, that now that there is a little bit of stability, talking on the blue line with Sandin back and Ethan Frank at some point here, that hopefully that can help, nudge the Capitals back in the right direction. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about line combinations and a bit of a quiet trade earlier this morning. Pretty much just an AHL trade. What's the latest and what's the details of said trade? I'll discuss straight ahead. The NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. So whether you're a fan of the Wizards or whatever team, if you want vested interest in those games, open up the FanDuel app, put down $5. All of a sudden, those games got that much more exciting. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up to play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hockey season is officially here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. But let's be real. Getting tickets can be a total headache between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout. It's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your favorite team. That is where Game Time comes in, the app that gives the fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. I love that what you see is what you pay, no hidden fees at checkouts. Plus, I could also see exactly what my view looked like before I bought the tickets with their in-app seat view feature. I'm going to see the Capitals play this season, and you best believe that I am going to be using the Game Time app. Why is that? Because it makes buying tickets so easy, and it helps take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets. That is why I love Game Time. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals, like the videos, and comment anything down below, and join the Locked On Capitals Insiders. Just like today, there was a trade that went on between the Caps and the Blues, and if you want to be the first to know and get text messages from yours truly, sign up for the Locked On Capitals Insiders. There is more information in the show notes. So in the final segment here, we're talking about what we saw, line combinations at practice, and how it might all shake out in the game Wednesday versus the Blues. So the top line looked something like this: Ovechkin, Strom, Beauvillier. Up top, Protas, McMichael, Wilson on the second. And then it was mixed there with Milano and Smallman. On the left, Lapierre in the center, and Leonard on the right wing. And fourth, Duhaime, Dowd, and Sordif. Now, if I was going to make a change, you're asking me what kind of change that you would make. And I know that this is at practice, so it very well could change. I would put Sordif back at the third line center position. I just think that he works that much better there. That way, I think that Lapierre could go back to the wing where he says he plays that much better, doesn't have the weight of the world on his shoulders. Keep McMichael up the center, Strom first line, and Dowd fourth line. For me, if I was the coach and was to put on the hat, say that, in the event that the Capitals are, as a matter of fact, not calling someone up from Hershey or some kind of trade is going to take place, that is what I would do. And like I said, good news. Frank was out there, but non-contact, still working his way back. In the second segment there, I talked about the Rasmus Sandin and the blue line for the Capitals. And like I said, Sandin back in the mix is good. But talking about the line combinations and the construction, Beauvillier getting top line minutes with Ovi and Strom. I think it's pretty good. We saw glimpses of that. And, he's used to doing big things. We saw him playing in the first line last season in the playoffs. And we also seen him, play with Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh. So this guy can do it. Beauvillier's always been that high energy winger who can forecheck hard and got enough finish, what I would say, to keep defenses honest. If that chemistry works, that is a huge boost. And we've seen that before this year, so nothing too new. The second line, Protas, McMichael, Wilson could quietly become the motor of this team. Of course, we know that Pierre-Luc Dubois is out of the mix. So that line, Protas, McMichael, Wilson, two big bodies, a guy in the center that's not so big, but that is his natural position, the center position. All three of those guys play, a heavier style of game, a two-way style. And McMichael's offensive instincts are starting to bud and come alive this year. So I think that, I don't know if that is the long-term answer at the second line center, but for right now, that'll do. But as far as McMichael, playing with confidence, really taking that next step, of course, I would like to see him get back into what brought him so much success last year. Like I've said, where he put up 14 goals, getting those dirty goals. Then you've got the third line with Milano, Smallman on the left, Lapierre and Leonard. And let's be honest, that's still being figured out. Milano brings skill, Leonard brings energy, and Lapierre brings speed. And he's kind of dipped and dived. He was in the preseason, Lapierre was good. To start the season, kind of disappeared a little bit, but has come on a bit stronger here as of late, because I think that he knows that if he doesn't bring it, then he is going to be the guy up in the press box. So I've liked his game and how much it has grown. The fourth line, Duhaime, Dowd, and Sordif. Again, I would move Sordif back to the third line center position, but in any event, if that is the way that it is, I've got no qualms with it. I like that configuration, but I do think that Sordif's strengths are at the center. But with that line constructed as is at practice, you've got reliable shutdown trio with a little bit of edge. Duhaime brings the physicality, the chirper, the guy that gets under your skin. Dowd as well. That is, some tough dudes. I guess Sordif, The jury's still out on how tough that he actually is. But in any event, that Duhaime and Dowd, those guys in particular, are not afraid of, doing whatever it takes, and, are often tasked with shutting down the opposition and doing a very good job. But it's a very earn your ice kind of lineup right now that, you got Milano in there, and different players, like I said, Lapierre, that the Capitals are struggling. The power play is struggling, that if you are going to get a sweater on any given night, you absolutely have to bring it. You cannot rest on your laurels. You cannot rest on what kind of preseason you had or former glory. You need to bring it. And like I said, Carberry's not giving anything away right now. You play well, you stay. Simple as that. And, it was just a sample, but Ovechkin on the third line. That's how serious Carberry was about jumpstarting this offense. Because let's be honest, we're still waiting patiently, hopefully, that Ovechkin finds his groove. 2 goals, in this season. I know that he missed the preseason for the Lions share, and to start the season. But at some point, they didn't make any big moves. So we're going to need the guys that generally contribute offensively to do just that. So next, to close it out here, we're going to talk about kind of a quiet trade. Nothing that I would get too excited about. Something that was broke around 8:30, 9:30 Eastern this morning was the Caps sent Callie Rosen, to St. Louis and picked up Corey Schueneman. He's a veteran AHL defenseman, 30 years old, left shot, and he's reporting to Hershey. Also has some time in the NHL as well. Again, it's depth, right? And it's going to benefit Hershey the most at the end of the day. I got quite excited that when I got a notification from Puckpedia that the Capitals made a trade, I had to stop what I was doing, step aside, and just, wow, what is it? And then I see that it is for Corey Schueneman. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, great. Kind of like what we saw last summer, where it was, the Capitals made a move. It was for Declan Chisholm and Justin Sordiff. I'm still waiting for Chris Patrick to make that move that's like, wow, he's back, baby. This guy, or he hasn't even been there. But to try to pick up the torch for Brian McClellan, I'm still waiting for that because it definitely needs to be done. But like I said, not a splash move, but it's smart depth and, potentially, ostensibly, a guy that could get called up. But what it tells me is the organization is bracing for injuries or maybe a longer recovery somewhere on the blue line. And, but, it's Capitals are not the only one. Hershey's a little hit up as well as far as injuries are concerned. So a tough thing for the entire organization. So to wrap it up here, big picture, Dubois out long-term, huge loss. Sandin back soon, fingers and toes crossed, huge relief. And the lineup's getting some interesting new looks. We'll see how it ultimately all shakes out Wednesday evening versus the Blues and see how the lines are constructed. But, you take a look at it. This is a rough patch. The Capitals have been here before. They didn't really run into this last year, except they kind of, floundered a little bit towards the latter part of the season. But, like I was talking about earlier in the show, that, they are swirling around the drain at the bottom of the Metro. The luxury and the good thing is the season's still young. The Capitals need to figure it out. Chris Patrick needs to figure it out. I still think a trade, something that you did not do last summer. Hello, can you hear me? That needs to get done right now. And if it means giving up a piece, it means giving up a piece. It's much too early to give up on the 25-26 season already. All right, listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. And now for your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi, and I'll talk to you again next time.